adding verbal cues. It's actually not done how you think it's done. There are some really key elements that we want to follow when we're adding our verbal cues. The first one is that we say our verbal cue first, then we wait a beat and follow with the hand signal. We would hold our position until our dog lands on the appropriate behavior, and then we mark and we feed in the position that we marked for. In this next video, watch for these critical elements in my training session with Rhubarb.
Sit.
I stand perfectly still while I say my verbal cue, then I follow with the hand signal, mark the behavior, and then feed.
Stand. Sit. Down.
So there we see what's called a prompt jump, where she's not waiting around for the hand signal, she's going right into position.
Stand.
She guessed on that one. I said my verbal cue first and then followed with a hand signal, and you'll notice that I'm holding perfectly still, waiting for her to think through it. You don't want to repeat your hand signals. Just like your verbal cues, you only say them one time.
Sit. Down. Sit.
So just one quick reminder, here I'm using a clicker. If you're using verbal markers, you would just say yes or good in its place. In dog training, there's a really common term. It's called feed for position. So what I mean by this is that if we click the clicker while our dogs are in a down position, but while we're rooting around for our treat, the dog pops into a sit, you simply want to bring them back into the down to hand over the food reward. The reason that we do this is it makes it inefficient for our dogs to start to cycle behaviors. We don't want them popping out of those positions in the long run, and so what we do is we always require them to go back into the marked position in order to eat the treat. Here's a quick example of me feeding for position with Rhubarb. She pops out of the down. I simply require her to go back into that position before I hand over the reward. Let's talk progression. Over time, you'll see the presence of what we call prompt jumps happening more and more frequently. Here's a quick clip.
Down.
Before I've had time to give her the hand signal, she's already going into the down position.
In the early days of training, we see a lot of these kind of guesses with the dog, where the dog is like, well, maybe they mean this one. And that's totally normal. They're really experimenting with their behaviors to see what works out. What I want to note is that when you start to see prompt jumps happening 50% of the time, we're going to start to tax the hand signal. Now, what I mean by that is that if we say sit and the dog requires us to then follow with the hand signal, we're going to give them a lower value treat, something like kibble. But at that 50% mark, we say sit, and before we've even had time to do the hand signal, the dog is already in the sit position. We're going to continue to pay them with a high value treat. Now, what we see with taxing the behavior is that the dog starts to really say, okay, the things that pay best for me is when I do this behavior on the verbal cue alone. And that's when we really start to see that good, strong retention. What I do want to note, though, is that it takes dogs a good 2 to 3 weeks of solid practice to truly understand verbal cues. They'll typically get the sit behavior and the down behavior fastest, and then the stand comes along a little bit slower. The reason that the stand takes a little bit longer is that our dogs stand all the time, and they're oftentimes not getting reinforced for it. And so they really need to parse out that, oh, okay, when it's paired with a cue, I actually do get paid. And so don't worry if that one lags behind a little bit. Remember, you'll just say the cue, do the hand signal, wait out the behavior, and then feed.
Let's give it a go.